Caleb Warren stood at the edge of his ranch, one hand resting on the splintered fence post, the other shading his eyes from the brutal afternoon sun. The wind carried something strange that day, something that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand straight up like little soldiers preparing for war. Out there, beyond the dried grass and the tumbleweeds rolling across the valley like lost children, he saw it, a single rider moving slowly toward his land. And beside that rider walked a horse carrying someone else, someone whose silhouette looked too still, too careful, like a person trying not to be noticed. The sky above them looked angry, like it was holding its breath before screaming. Dark clouds gathered on the horizon, stacking on top of each other like giant gray pillows ready to burst, and the wind started howling louder, whipping dust devils into spirals that danced across the open land. Caleb's chest tightened. He wasn't expecting visitors. He never expected visitors. Out here, people only came when something was wrong. When trouble wore boots and knocked on your door without asking permission first. As the rider came closer, Caleb could see it was Deputy Morrison, a thin man with a face like weathered leather and eyes that never quite looked at you straight. The woman beside him sat perfectly still in her saddle, her dark dress flowing in the wind like a shadow made of fabric. She didn't slump or lean or look tired from the ride. She sat like a statue, like someone who had learned how to disappear even when everyone was watching. Caleb walked down from the fence toward his front porch, his boots crunching against the dry earth. His ranch hands, two older men named Pete and Samuel, stopped their work by the barn and watched with curious eyes. Everyone could feel it. The storm wasn't just in the sky. It was riding in with that woman, and it was going to change everything. The deputy pulled his horse to a stop, just outside Caleb's porch, and reached into his coat pocket. Without a word, he pulled out a folded piece of paper sealed with red wax and held it out toward Caleb. His hand trembled slightly, just enough for Caleb to notice. "This is from the town council," the deputy said, his voice flat and rehearsed, like he'd been told exactly what to say and nothing more. "Orders, you're to house this woman temporarily. Few weeks, maybe longer. Council's orders." Caleb took the letter, broke the seal, and unfolded it slowly. The words were written in neat handwriting, too neat, like someone had been very careful about every single word. "You are hereby required to provide temporary shelter to Mrs. Evelyn Hart, widow, for a period of no less than 3 weeks. This is not a request. This is a directive from the council for the good of the community. Refusal will result in consequences." Caleb read it twice, then looked up at the deputy. "Consequences? What kind of consequences?" The deputy wouldn't meet his eyes. He shifted in his saddle, glanced back at the woman, then back at Caleb. "Just do what the letter says, Warren. It's not my place to explain. She has nowhere else to go." His voice sounded rehearsed again, like he was reading lines from a play he didn't understand. Caleb looked past the deputy to the woman. She sat there on her horse, perfectly still, her hands resting lightly on the saddle horn. Her face was pale but calm, not frightened or sad or angry, just calm in a way that made Caleb's stomach twist. Her eyes met his, and for a moment the world seemed to go silent. The wind stopped howling. The clouds stopped moving. Everything froze except for those eyes staring right into him, dark and deep and full of secrets that screamed louder than words ever could. "Ma'am," Caleb said, his voice careful, respectful. "You're welcome here. Let me help you down." She didn't answer. Instead, she swung her leg over the saddle and climbed down on her own, smooth and quick like someone who'd done it 1,000 times. She didn't stumble or grab for support. She landed lightly on her feet, adjusted her skirt with one quick motion, and looked at him again with that same unsettling calm. Her hands were covered in thin gloves, but even through the fabric, Caleb could see they were strong hands, working hands. Not the soft, delicate hands of someone who'd spent her life being taken care of. The deputy cleared his throat. "She's been through a lot. Her husband passed recently. Bar accident. Terrible thing. Town thought it best she stay somewhere quiet until things settle." He spoke quickly, too quickly, like he wanted to finish talking and leave as fast as possible. "You'll be compensated, of course. Council will see to it." Caleb folded the letter and slipped it into his pocket. What kind of bar accident? Fell, hit his head. Died instantly. The deputy's voice was clipped, final, like he was closing a book and refusing to open it again. That's all there is to it. But Caleb knew people. He'd spent years reading faces, listening to voices, watching how folks moved when they were telling the truth and how they moved when they were hiding something big and ugly. The deputy was lying, or at least not telling everything. And the woman, this Evelyn Hart, she stood there watching the conversation like she was listening to strangers talk about someone else's life, not hers. Where are her belongings? Caleb asked. The deputy nodded toward a single worn leather bag tied to the back of Evelyn's horse. One bag, that was it. Everything she owned in the world fit into one small bag. Caleb felt something stir inside him, something he hadn't felt in years. Pity mixed with suspicion. A confusing combination that made his head hurt. I'll take good care of her, Caleb said. More to the woman than to the deputy. The deputy tipped his hat, turned his horse around, and rode off without another word. He didn't say goodbye to Evelyn. He didn't look back. He just spurred his horse into a trot and disappeared into the dust and the rising wind like he couldn't get away fast enough. Caleb watched him go, then turned back to the woman standing in front of his porch. Mrs. Hart, he said gently. I'm Caleb Warren. This is my ranch. You're safe here. She tilted her head slightly, studying him with those dark, knowing eyes. Safe, she repeated softly, like she was testing the word to see if it still meant anything. That's a kind thought, Mr. Warren, but I'm not sure anywhere is safe anymore. Her voice was low and smooth, but underneath it, Caleb heard something sharp, something broken but not defeated. She wasn't asking for pity. She wasn't begging for help. She was simply stating a fact, and that fact sent a cold shiver down Caleb's spine. Let me show you to your room, he said, picking up her bag before she could protest. It was heavier than he expected, solid and packed tight. Whatever was inside it wasn't just clothes. He led her through the front door into the cool darkness of his ranch house, and she followed silently. Her footsteps barely making a sound on the wooden floor. The house smelled like leather and coffee and wood smoke. Caleb led her down a short hallway to a small room at the back of the house. It had a bed, a chair, a small table, and a window that looked out over the fields. Simple, clean, quiet. He set her bag down on the chair and stepped back toward the door. There's water in the kitchen. Food too. Help yourself to whatever you need. I'll be working outside most of the day, but if you need anything, just call. She stood in the center of the room, her hands folded in front of her, looking around slowly like she was memorizing every corner, every shadow, every possible way in or out. Thank you, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I won't be any trouble. Caleb nodded and left, closing the door gently behind him. As he walked back down the hallway, he heard the soft click of a lock turning. She'd locked herself in. He paused for a moment, listening, then continued walking. Outside, the storm clouds rolled closer, and the wind picked up again, rattling the windows and whistling through the cracks in the barn walls. Pete and Samuel were waiting for him by the water trough, their faces full of questions. Who's the woman, boss? Pete asked, spitting tobacco juice into the dirt. Widow, Caleb said flatly. Town council wants me to house her for a while. That's strange, Samuel said, scratching his gray beard. Since when does the council tell folks who they got a shelter? And why you? You're not exactly close to town. Caleb didn't have an answer. He just shook his head and walked past them toward the barn. Keep your heads down and do your work. Whatever this is, it's not our business. But even as he said it, he knew it was a lie. It was already his business. The moment that woman stepped onto his land, it became his business, and something deep in his gut told him this wasn't going to end with her quietly leaving in a few weeks. Something was wrong, deeply wrong, and the people in town knew it. They'd sent her here not to protect her, but to hide her, and maybe to hide something else too. That night, Caleb lay in his bed listening to the storm finally break. Rain pounded against the roof like 1,000 tiny fists, and thunder rolled across the sky like drums announcing war. He stared at the ceiling, unable to sleep, his mind spinning with questions. Who was Evelyn Hart, really? Why had her husband died? Why did the deputy leave so quickly? Why did the counsel's letter sound more like a threat than a request? And then he heard it, footsteps in the hallway. Soft, careful footsteps moving slowly past his door toward the kitchen. He sat up, listening. The footsteps paused, then continued. A moment later, he heard the creak of the back door opening, then closing. Caleb got out of bed, pulled on his boots, and walked quietly to the window. Through the rain-streaked glass, he saw her standing outside in the storm, her hair and dress soaked, looking out toward the horizon like she was waiting for something, or someone to appear. She stood there for a long time, unmoving while the rain poured down around her. Finally, she turned and walked back inside, and Caleb heard her footsteps return down the hallway to her room. The lock clicked again. Silence. Caleb went back to bed, but sleep didn't come. He lay there thinking about the woman standing alone in the rain, and he wondered what kind of pain could drive someone to do that. To stand in a storm and let the sky cry on them like they were hoping it would wash something away. Whatever secrets Evelyn Hart carried, they were heavy ones. The kind that bent your back and made every step feel like walking through mud. The next morning dawned gray and cold. Caleb woke early, dressed, and went to the kitchen to make coffee. Evelyn was already there, standing at the stove, cooking eggs and bacon. She didn't turn around when he entered. She just kept cooking, her movements precise and efficient, like a person who'd learned to do things quickly and quietly to avoid drawing attention. "Morning," Caleb said carefully. "Good morning," she replied without looking at him. "I hope you don't mind. I made breakfast. I don't like sitting idle. I don't mind at all." He poured himself a cup of coffee and sat down at the table, watching her. She cooked standing up, never sitting, never relaxing, always ready to move at a moment's notice. When the food was done, she put a plate in front of him and one on the counter for herself. Then she ate standing up, her eyes constantly flicking toward the window, toward the door, toward every entrance and exit. "You don't have to stand," Caleb said gently. "You can sit." "I'm fine standing," she said, her voice polite but firm. "I prefer it." Caleb didn't push. He ate his breakfast in silence, and when he was done, he thanked her and went outside to work. The rain had stopped, but the ground was muddy and slick. He spent the day mending fences, checking on the cattle, and trying not to think about the woman in his house. But every time he looked back toward the ranch, he saw her standing at the window, watching the horizon with that same anxious, waiting expression. Days passed like that, slow and tense. Evelyn cooked, cleaned, and kept to herself. She never asked for anything. She never complained. She never smiled. She moved through the house like a ghost, there but not there, present but not connected to anything or anyone. At night, Caleb heard her pacing in her room, heard her soft crying through the walls, heard the sound of her packing and unpacking that small leather bag over and over again, like she was practicing for the moment when she'd have to run. Caleb wanted to ask her what was wrong. Wanted to offer help, but he didn't know how. He was a rancher, a man of few words and simple habits. He wasn't good with emotions or complicated situations. So he kept his distance and let her be, even though every instinct told him she needed someone to talk to, someone to trust. Then one morning, he found his broken lantern sitting on the kitchen table, fixed. The glass had been cracked for weeks, and he'd been meaning to repair it but never found the time. Now it sat there, good as new, the glass replaced, the wick trimmed, the metal polished. Evelyn was outside hanging laundry on the line, her back to him. He walked outside and stood beside her. "You fixed my lantern." "It was broken," she said simply, pinning a wet shirt to the line. "I fix things when they're broken. Where'd you get the glass?" "Found some in the barn." "Cut it to size?" She didn't look at him, just kept hanging laundry. Her hands moving quickly and expertly. Caleb watched her for a moment, then noticed something else, his saddle hanging on the fence. The torn strap repaired with perfect tight stitches. He hadn't asked her to do that. He hadn't even mentioned it was torn. She just noticed and fixed it. "You're very capable," he said carefully. I've had to be. She picked up the empty laundry basket and turned to go back inside, but paused at the door. When you can't rely on anyone else, you learn to do everything yourself. She went inside before he could respond. Caleb stood there in the yard, staring at the repaired saddle, and realized something important. Evelyn Hart wasn't the helpless widow the town had described. She knew how to fix things, how to work, how to survive. She wasn't fragile or broken. She was strong, maybe stronger than anyone gave her credit for. So why had they sent her here? Why were they treating her like she needed to be hidden away? That afternoon, while checking the cattle in the far pasture, Caleb heard barking. He followed the sound to the back of the barn and found Evelyn kneeling in the dirt beside a stray dog, a mangy brown mutt with a torn ear and a bleeding paw. She was gently cleaning the wound with a torn piece of cloth, speaking softly to the dog in a voice so tender it made Caleb stop in his tracks. "Easy now," she whispered. "I know it hurts. I know. But you're going to be okay. You just need someone to help you, that's all. Everyone needs help sometimes." The dog whimpered but didn't pull away. It looked up at her with trusting eyes, and Evelyn stroked its head gently while she worked. Caleb approached slowly, not wanting to startle her. "That dog's been hanging around for a few days," he said. "Won't let anyone near him." "He's scared," Evelyn said, tying the cloth around the dog's paw. "He's been hurt before. He doesn't know who to trust anymore." She looked up at Caleb, and for the first time, he saw real emotion in her eyes, sadness, deep and heavy like an ocean. "Things break, Mr. Warren, animals, people, trust. But some things can be mended if you're patient and gentle enough." Caleb crouched down beside her. "You're good with your hands. Where'd you learn all this?" She looked back at the dog. "My father was a ranch hand. He taught me everything, how to mend fences, treat wounds, tie knots, shoot straight. He said a woman should know how to take care of herself because the world doesn't always take care of women. He sounds like a wise man. He was." She finished tying the bandage and stood up, brushing dirt from her skirt. The dog limped after her a few steps, then sat down and watched her go. "He died when I was 16. After that, I had to use everything he taught me." It was the most she'd said since arriving, and Caleb didn't want the conversation to end. "Your husband," he said carefully. "The town said it was an accident." Her face went cold again, all the warmth draining out of it like water through a cracked cup. "The town says a lot of things, Mr. Warren. Very few of them are true." She walked away before he could ask anything else, leaving him standing there with more questions than answers. That night, a massive thunderstorm rolled in, shaking the house with thunder so loud it sounded like the sky was splitting open. Lightning flashed through the windows, turning everything white for brief, blinding moments. Caleb was in the kitchen when he heard a crash from Evelyn's room, followed by the sound of sobbing, raw and desperate. He knocked on her door. "Mrs. Hart? Are you all right?" No answer. Just more crying, the kind that came from somewhere deep and broken inside. "I'm coming in," he said, and opened the door. Evelyn was sitting on the floor beside her bed, her knees pulled up to her chest, her face buried in her hands. Her bag was open on the bed, its contents spilled across the blanket. Clothes, a few photographs, a small wooden box, and something else that made Caleb freeze, a pistol. She looked up at him, her face streaked with tears, her eyes red and swollen. "I didn't kill him," she said, her voice breaking. "I swear on everything sacred, I didn't kill him." Caleb stood very still. "I didn't say you did." "But they think I did. The whole town thinks I did. They look at me like I'm a murderer, like I'm dangerous." She wiped her face with the back of her hand, her breath coming in short, ragged gasps. "He was cruel, Mr. Warren, my husband. He hit me, he hurt me. He said terrible things. But I didn't kill him. I wanted to leave. I was planning to leave. But I didn't kill him?" Caleb slowly knelt down on the floor across from her, keeping his voice calm and steady. "Tell me what happened." She stared at him for a long moment, searching his face for judgment, for suspicion, for anything that would tell her he was like the others. But all she saw was patience and quiet strength, and something inside her finally broke open. He died in a bar, she said, her voice shaking. He was drunk. He got into an argument with someone. He fell, hit his head on the corner of a table. The doctor said he died instantly. It was an accident. A witness saw the whole thing. But his brothers blamed me anyway. Why? Because I wanted to leave him. Because I told people what he'd done to me. Because they hate me. Her hands clenched into fists. They told the town I poisoned him. They said I drove him to drink. They said I pushed him. None of it's true, but people believe them because they're important and I'm nobody. If it was an accident, why are you here? Why did the council send you to my ranch? Evelyn looked at him, and in her eyes he saw something that made his blood run cold, fear, pure and absolute. Because they want me out of town. They want me where no one can hear me, where no one will listen if I try to tell the truth. They're protecting his brothers, Mr. Warren. They're making me disappear. Thunder crashed outside and lightning lit up the room. Caleb felt anger rising in his chest, hot and fierce. That's not justice. No, she said quietly. It's not. But justice doesn't matter when powerful people want you gone. Caleb stood up and held out his hand. Come on, you shouldn't sit on the floor. She looked at his hand for a moment, then took it. He helped her to her feet, and for a brief moment, they stood close enough that he could see the exhaustion in her face, the weight she'd been carrying alone for so long. You're safe here, he said firmly. Whatever those men think they can do, they'll have to go through me first. She searched his eyes again, and this time she saw something that made her shoulders relax just slightly, honesty. Why would you do that? She whispered. You don't even know me. Because it's the right thing to do, he said simply. And because I know what it's like to watch someone you care about get destroyed by lies. He told her then about his sister, about how she'd been falsely accused of theft by a wealthy merchant, about how she'd been sent to prison despite her innocence, about how she died there from illness before he could prove the truth. His voice was steady, but his eyes were full of old pain, pain that had never fully healed. Evelyn listened, and when he finished, she said softly, I'm sorry. So am I, he replied. But I couldn't save her. Maybe I can help you. From that night on, everything changed. Evelyn stopped locking her door. She started eating at the table instead of standing up. She talked more, smiled occasionally. And the dog with the torn ear followed her everywhere, sleeping on the porch outside her room every night. And Caleb found himself looking forward to mornings, to conversations over coffee, to the sound of her voice and the rare moments when she laughed at something he said. But peace never lasts. When powerful people want you silenced, one night. 3 weeks after Evelyn's arrival, Caleb woke to the sound of horses outside. He grabbed his rifle and went to the window. In the moonlight, he saw 5 men on horseback, all wearing deputy badges, all carrying guns. They weren't riding in casually. They were riding in like men on a mission. Caleb went to Evelyn's door and knocked quietly. She opened it immediately, already dressed, her pistol in her hand. They're here, she said. It wasn't a question. Stay behind me, Caleb said, and walked to the front door. He opened it and stepped out onto the porch. His rifle held loosely but ready. The lead deputy, a thick-shouldered man named Briggs, dismounted and walked forward. Evening, Warren. We need to talk to the woman. About what? Caleb asked calmly. Official business. Step aside. It's the middle of the night. Whatever business you have can wait till morning. Briggs' face hardened. This isn't a request. And this is my land, Caleb said, his voice dropping lower, colder. You don't question a woman in the dark with guns drawn. Come back in daylight or don't come back at all. The other deputies shifted in their saddles, hands moving toward their weapons. Tension crackled in the air like lightning about to strike. Evelyn stepped out onto the porch beside Caleb, her chin lifted, her eyes defiant. I'm right here, she said clearly. Ask your questions. Briggs looked at her with barely concealed contempt. We've had reports. Folks saying you were involved in illegal dealings with your husband. Folks saying you knew about things you shouldn't have known about. What folks? She demanded. Give me names. Doesn't matter. It matters to me. Briggs ignored her and looked at Caleb. You're harboring a criminal, Warren? That makes you complicit. Show me proof, Caleb said. Show me one piece of real evidence that she's done anything wrong. We're conducting an investigation. Then conduct it properly. In daylight. With a real warrant. Not like thugs in the middle of the night. Briggs took a step closer, his hand on his gun. You're making a mistake, Warren. No, Caleb said quietly. You are. For a long, terrible moment, nobody moved. The deputies watched Caleb. Caleb watched Briggs. Evelyn stood perfectly still, her heart pounding but her face calm. Finally, Briggs stepped back, his jaw tight with anger. This isn't over, he said. I didn't think it was, Caleb replied. The deputies mounted their horses and rode off into the darkness. And Caleb and Evelyn stood on the porch watching them go. When they were gone, Evelyn let out a long, shaky breath. Thank you, she whispered. Don't thank me yet, Caleb said grimly. They'll be back. And next time, they'll bring more men. He was right. Over the next few days, rumors spread through the valley like wildfire. Evelyn had poisoned her husband. Evelyn ran illegal trade with bandits. Evelyn planned the whole thing. The lies grew bigger and more outrageous with each telling. And Caleb realized something chilling. Someone was orchestrating this, feeding lies to people, building a case against Evelyn that had nothing to do with truth and everything to do with making her disappear. He rode into town one afternoon and overheard two deputies talking outside the saloon. The brothers want her gone permanently, one said. Sheriff's dragging his feet, but they're getting impatient. Caleb felt cold rage settle into his bones. The brothers. Evelyn's dead husband's brothers. They were behind everything, the lies, the accusations, the pressure on the council. They wanted Evelyn silenced, and they didn't care how it happened. That night, he sat Evelyn down at the kitchen table and told her everything he'd learned. Her face went pale, but she didn't cry. She just nodded slowly. I suspected as much, she said. They controlled everything my husband did. He wanted to confess, to tell the truth about their illegal shipments, about the money they stole from the town fund. They threatened him. They threatened me. And when he died, they decided I'd make the perfect person to blame. We need proof, Caleb said. We need something that shows what they really did. Evelyn thought for a moment, then her eyes widened. The telegraph station. The old one outside town. My husband used to send messages from there. He kept copies of everything in a ledger. If it's still there, then we find it, Caleb finished. They left before dawn, riding quietly through the darkness toward the abandoned telegraph station 5 miles outside town. The building was old and sagging, its windows broken, its door hanging off its hinges. But inside, covered in dust and cobwebs, they found what they were looking for: ledger books filled with coded messages, unsigned testimonies, and most importantly, a letter written in shaky handwriting. Caleb read it aloud by lantern light. My name is Thomas Hart. I am writing this because I fear for my life and for my wife's life. My brothers, Robert and James Hart, have forced me to participate in illegal activities, theft, smuggling, and fraud. I tried to stop, but they threatened Evelyn. I am writing this as proof, so that if something happens to me, the truth will be known. They are dangerous men. Please protect my wife. Evelyn's hands trembled as she held the letter. Tears streamed down her face, but she made no sound. Caleb carefully folded the letter and put it in his pocket along with the ledgers. We have everything we need, he said. They heard horses outside. Caleb grabbed Evelyn's hand and pulled her toward the back door, but it was too late. Voices shouted. Footsteps pounded on the wooden porch. They were surrounded. Out the window, Caleb whispered, and they climbed through a broken window into the scrub brush behind the building. They ran through the darkness, stumbling over rocks and roots, hearing the men shouting behind them. They reached their horses just in time, mounted, and rode hard back toward the ranch. The sound of pursuit echoing in their ears, they made it home as the sun rose, exhausted and terrified but alive. Caleb locked the doors, loaded his rifle, and told Pete and Samuel to be ready for trouble. If anyone comes, you protect her, he said, nodding toward Evelyn. No matter what. But he knew running wasn't the answer. They had the proof. Now they had to use it. At noon, Caleb rode into town alone, the letter and ledgers tucked safely in his saddlebag. He rode straight to the center of the town square, dismounted, and stood in the middle of the street. People stopped and stared. The sheriff came out of his office, his face wary. Townspeople gathered, whispering, watching. "I have evidence," Caleb shouted, his voice carrying across the square. "Evidence that Evelyn Hart is innocent. Evidence that she's been framed by powerful men who want her silenced." He pulled out the letter and read it aloud, every word clear and strong. He showed the ledgers, explained the coded messages, named names. The crowd murmured, shifted, looked at each other with growing understanding. The sheriff's face went pale. "Where are Robert and James Hart?" Caleb demanded silence. Then, from the back of the crowd, two men pushed forward. Tall, well-dressed men with cold eyes and angry faces. "This is slander," Robert Hart said. "That letter is fake." "Then explain the ledgers," Caleb said, holding them up. "Explain the money. Explain why you've been lying about Evelyn." "She's a murderer," James Hart snarled. "She killed our brother." "Your brother died in an accident witnessed by multiple people," Caleb shot back. "And you've been using his death to cover your crimes." The sheriff stepped forward, his hand on his gun. For a moment, Caleb thought he might side with the Harts, but then the sheriff looked at the letter, at the ledgers, at the faces of the townspeople watching, and something shifted in his expression. "Robert Hart, James Hart," the sheriff said slowly. "You're under arrest." The crowd erupted. The Hart brothers tried to run, but deputies grabbed them, dragged them back, locked them in iron chains. The crowd surged forward, shouting questions, demanding answers. And in the chaos, Caleb saw Evelyn standing at the edge of the square, her face streaked with tears but her eyes shining with something he hadn't seen before. Hope. He walked over to her, and she collapsed into his arms, sobbing with relief. He held her tightly, letting her cry, letting all the fear and pain pour out of her. "It's over," he whispered. "You're free." Weeks passed. The Hart brothers were tried and convicted. Evelyn's name was cleared. The town apologized, though apologies couldn't undo the damage. But Evelyn didn't want to leave. She stayed on Caleb's ranch, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. She built a small garden behind the barn, planted vegetables and flowers, and spent her days working beside Caleb, fixing things, mending things, healing things. The stray dog with the torn ear became her constant companion, sleeping on her porch every night, following her everywhere during the day. And slowly, carefully, like two broken things learning to trust again, Evelyn and Caleb grew closer. They talked over coffee in the mornings. They worked side by side in the fields. They sat on the porch in the evenings, watching the sun set over the valley. And neither of them felt alone anymore. One evening, as the sky turned gold and purple, Evelyn turned to Caleb and said softly, "Thank you for seeing me when everyone else refused to." Caleb looked at her, at the woman who'd walked into his life carrying blame that was never hers, at the woman who'd survived hell and come out stronger. "You walked in carrying a weight you never should have carried," he said quietly. "I only held the lantern so you could see your way out." She smiled, a real smile, and reached over to take his hand. He held it gently, and they sat there together. Two people who'd been broken by the world but had found a way to mend each other. One quiet moment at a time, the wind whispered through the valley, carrying away the dust of the past, and for the first time in a long time, everything felt like it might actually be okay.